The island that wasn't on the map. My name is Daniel. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that what happened to us was supernatural. In fact, part of me still hopes there is a normal, logical explanation for everything we saw that night. But 5 years have passed, and there is still one question I can't answer. Who left those wet footprints inside our boat? This happened during the summer of 2021. At the time, I was living in Michigan, and my oldest friend, Eric, had recently bought a used motorboat. It wasn't expensive, it wasn't luxurious, but to Eric, it was the greatest thing he had ever owned. Almost every weekend he would call us and say the same thing. "The weather's good. The water's calm. Let's go out." That weekend was no different. There were 4 of us on the boat. Me, Eric, my friend Lucas, and Lucas's younger sister Emily. We left the marina at around 11 in the morning. There wasn't really a plan. We had food, a few drinks, and Eric said we would be back before sunset. For the first 2 hours, everything was completely normal. Then the weather changed. Dark gray clouds began gathering above us. The wind picked up, and the water, which had been calm only minutes earlier, started throwing the boat from side to side. Eric checked the GPS. I still remember the way he stared at the screen. He didn't say anything for several seconds. Then he quietly said, "That's weird." I asked him what was wrong. He turned the GPS toward me. Our position was clearly visible on the screen. But about a mile ahead of us there was a small island. The problem was, there was nothing on the map. Lucas laughed and said the GPS was probably outdated. Maybe the island was too small to be marked. Eric didn't seem convinced. He wanted to turn around. Then the rain started. At first it was only a few drops. Within minutes it was coming down so hard that we could barely see ahead of the boat. Eric decided we would stop near the island and wait for the storm to weaken. Just for a little while. That was our first mistake. There was a narrow strip of shoreline on one side of the island. Eric stopped the boat a short distance from it and dropped the anchor. We moved through the shallow water and reached the beach. The island was small. Dense trees, wet soil, and an uncomfortable silence. At first I didn't pay much attention to it. Emily did. She looked at me and asked, "Does anything feel strange to you?" I joked that I was hungry. She didn't laugh. She kept staring at the trees. Then she said, "There aren't any birds." I went quiet. She was right. There were hundreds of trees around us, but not a single bird. No insects. No small animals. Nothing. Other than the rain hitting the leaves, the entire island was silent. We put up a plastic sheet near the beach and sat underneath it to stay out of the rain. About 40 minutes passed. The storm wasn't getting weaker. It was getting worse. That's when Lucas noticed the boat. He pointed toward the water. "Whose boat is that?" All 4 of us turned. About 100 feet from our boat was another vessel. It was small, old, and white. I swear that when we arrived at the island, that boat wasn't there. Eric immediately stood up. "Hello?" No answer. He shouted again. Still nothing. The boat's lights were off. There was no one visible on the deck, and the strangest part was that the boat was moving with the waves. But we couldn't see an anchor line. Eric said we were leaving. This time nobody argued. We grabbed our things and started toward our boat. I was just about to step into the water when Emily grabbed my arm. Her grip was so tight that it hurt. She was staring at the wet sand. "What is it?" I asked. She spoke so quietly I almost didn't hear her. "There are 4 of us, right?" I looked at her. "Yeah." She pointed toward the beach. Our footprints were visible in the wet sand, but there was another set. Bare feet. Long, unusually narrow. The footprints started at the water. They crossed the beach and disappeared into the trees. The problem was, those footprints hadn't been there before. Eric told us to move. We reached the boat, pulled up the anchor, and left the island. For the next 10 minutes, nobody spoke. I kept looking behind us. The old white boat was still near the island. Then lightning flashed. For maybe 1 second, the entire shoreline became visible, and I saw someone standing there, a tall figure, completely still, watching our boat leave. I immediately told Eric. He didn't turn around. He just pushed the boat faster. We returned to the marina at around 9:30 that night. The rain had weakened by then. Eric tied the boat to the dock. Lucas and Emily grabbed their things and headed toward the parking lot. I stayed behind to help Eric clean up. We were wiping rainwater from the seats when Eric suddenly stopped. He was staring at the small cabin door. "What?" I asked. He didn't answer. He pointed at the floor. There was water inside the cabin. At first, I assumed it had dripped from our clothes. Then I saw the footprint, a wet, bare footprint, inside the boat, then another and another. The footprints began near the back of the cabin. They led directly toward a small storage closet where Eric kept the life jackets. The closet door was closed. Eric and I stood there in complete silence. Neither of us moved. Then a sound came from inside the closet. Knock, just once. Eric grabbed my arm. We got off the boat. We didn't even look back. Marina security was called. Then the police arrived. 2 officers searched the entire boat. They opened the closet. Nobody was inside. There were only life jackets. But something was missing. Eric's red jacket. The same jacket he had left inside the cabin that morning. The police suggested that someone may have climbed onto the boat at the marina. I wanted to believe them. Then Eric called me the next morning. His voice was shaking. He sent me a photograph. It was a picture of the island. Eric had gone back there alone. I still don't understand why. The photograph showed the same beach, the same trees, and hanging from a tree branch was Eric's red jacket. Below it, in the wet soil, were 5 sets of footprints. 4 sets led back toward the water. The 5th set came out of the forest and went directly into the lake. We never returned to that island. Eric sold his boat 2 weeks later. As for the island, I've searched for it online more times than I can count. I've checked different maps, GPS systems, satellite images. I've never found it again. Sometimes I think we accidentally discovered a place we were never supposed to see. But then I remember those wet footprints inside our boat, and I wonder if I've been thinking about it the wrong way. Maybe we didn't find the island that day. Maybe something on that island found us. Something was under my boat. I've owned boats for most of my adult life, and if you spend enough time on the water, you eventually learn something. Boats make noise, wood expands, metal shifts, ropes tighten. Water hits the hull in ways that can sound like footsteps, scratching, or even someone knocking from the other side. For years I laughed at people who got scared by those sounds. Then 3 years ago, I spent 4 nights at a marina in northern Wisconsin. And now, whenever I hear 3 knocks against the bottom of a boat, I get off the water. My name is Ryan. At the time this happened, I was 38 years old. I owned a 26-foot cabin cruiser that I had spent nearly 2 years restoring. It wasn't a luxury boat, but it had a small sleeping cabin, a tiny kitchen, and enough space for me to stay on it for several days. During the summer, I practically lived there. The marina where I kept it was located on a large lake, several miles from the nearest town. It was a quiet place. During the day, there were usually families, fishermen, and people working on their boats. But at night, the marina became almost completely empty. Most boat owners went home before sunset. I didn't. I liked sleeping on the water. There was something peaceful about waking up before sunrise and hearing the lake outside the cabin. At least, there used to be. The first night started normally. I had spent most of the afternoon fishing. Around 8 that evening, I returned to the marina, tied my boat to the dock, and made myself something to eat. By 10, almost every light around the marina was off. There were maybe 15 boats tied along my section of the dock. As far as I knew, I was the only person sleeping there that night. At around midnight, I went into the cabin. I read for a while, and eventually fell asleep. Then I woke up. I didn't know why at first. The cabin was dark. The boat was gently moving beneath me. I reached for my phone, 3:17 a.m. I was about to put it down when I heard something. Knock, knock, knock. The sound came from directly underneath me. I sat up. For a few seconds I listened. Nothing. I assumed a piece of wood or debris had floated against the hull. I lay back down, maybe 30 seconds later. Knock, knock, knock. I froze. From outside the boat, the sound was much clearer. It wasn't coming from the side of the hull. It was coming from underneath it. I leaned over the railing and pointed my flashlight into the water. The beam only reached a few feet below the surface. The water was dark and slightly cloudy. I couldn't see anything. I stood there for another minute. No more knocking. Eventually, I convinced myself it was probably a large fish. I went back inside. I didn't sleep very well after that. The next morning I mentioned it to a marina employee named Carl. Carl was probably in his 60s. He had worked at the marina for years and seemed to know everything about the lake. When I told him about the knocking, he laughed. "Carp," he said. I asked him if Carp knocked 3 times. He looked at me for a second. Then he smiled. Maybe you got a polite one. I laughed, and that should have been the end of it. The second night I stayed on the boat again. I wasn't scared. Not yet. If anything, I was curious. Before going to sleep, I checked the time. 12:46 a.m. I left my phone beside the bed and closed my eyes. Sometime later, I woke up. My phone screen was still off. Before I even checked the time, I heard it. Knock. 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 I looked at my phone. 3:17 a.m. I remember feeling cold, not physically cold. It was that strange feeling you get when something happens exactly the way you were hoping it wouldn't. I stayed in bed. Another 3 knocks came from underneath the boat. Then silence. I didn't move. A minute passed. Then something scraped along the bottom of the hull. Slowly. It started near the front of the boat and moved toward the cabin. I could hear it directly underneath me. Scrape! I jumped out of bed. The sound stopped. I grabbed my flashlight and ran outside. Again, there was nothing. But this time, the water beside my boat was moving, not like waves. It looked like something large had just gone beneath the surface. I aimed the flashlight at it. For a second, I thought I saw something pale moving under the boat. Then it disappeared. I didn't sleep on the boat that night. I grabbed my keys and drove home. The next afternoon I returned. In daylight, the whole thing felt stupid. The lake was bright. People were everywhere. Children were running along the dock. Carl was filling a fuel tank. I almost felt embarrassed. Then I checked the bottom of my boat. There were scratches on the hull. 3 long marks. They ran from the front of the boat toward the cabin. I called Carl over. He looked at them. His expression changed. He crouched near the dock and stared at the scratches for a while. Did you hit something? I told him no. He asked if I was sure. I reminded him about the noise. Carl stood up. This time, he didn't joke about carp. He told me the marina had security cameras. One of them pointed toward my section of the dock. We went into the small marina office. Carl pulled up the footage from the night before. The camera wasn't great. It recorded in black and white at night. My boat was visible near the center of the screen. Carl moved the recording forward. 3:10 a.m., nothing. 3:15, still nothing. Then the timestamp reached 3:17. Carl stopped. What's that? There was something in the water, about 20 feet behind my boat. At first it looked like a patch of darkness. Then it moved, slowly, directly toward my boat. Carl played the footage. The shape disappeared behind the boat. A few seconds later, my boat moved. Not much. Just a small shift to one side. Then it moved again. Carl leaned closer to the screen. I asked him what kind of animal could do that. He didn't answer. Then we saw something else. A pale shape appeared beside the boat. It rose slightly above the surface, only for a second, then went back underwater. The camera quality was too poor to see details, but I knew one thing. It wasn't a fish jumping. It looked vertical, almost like the top of someone's head. Carl closed the video. He told me not to stay on the boat that night. I asked him why. He said the cameras probably made normal things look strange in the dark. But his face told me he didn't believe that. I should have listened to him. Instead, I decided to stay one more night. I wanted an explanation. I bought a waterproof action camera from a store in town that afternoon. I attached it to a pole and secured it to the back of the boat. The camera was positioned underwater. It pointed toward the bottom of the hull. I connected the camera to my phone. If anything came near the boat, I would see it. That night the marina slowly emptied. Carl left at around 9. Before leaving, he walked to my boat. "You sure about this?" I told him I was. He shook his head. Then he said something I didn't understand at the time. "If you hear it, don't knock back." I laughed. Carl didn't. He walked away. By midnight, I was alone. I sat inside the cabin watching the live camera feed on my phone. The underwater view was almost completely dark. Small particles floated past the lens. Occasionally, a fish appeared. Nothing unusual. 1 a.m. passed, then 2. By 3, I was exhausted. I kept checking the time. 3:14, 3:15, 3:16. I stared at my phone. Then 3:17. Knock, knock, knock. The sound came from underneath me. My entire body went still. I looked at the camera feed. Nothing, just dark water. Then the image moved. Something had touched the camera. The video shook. For 2 seconds, the screen became blurry. Then it cleared. There was something beneath my boat. I couldn't see the entire shape. It was too close to the camera. All I could see was something pale, smooth, almost gray. It slowly moved across the screen. I held my breath. Then it stopped. Directly below the cabin, the knocking came again. Knock, knock, knock. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I was scared. Maybe I was tired. Maybe part of me still believed someone was playing a joke. I reached down and knocked 3 times against the cabin floor. Knock, knock, knock. The water camera immediately went black. Something hit the bottom of the boat so hard that I fell against the wall. The entire boat lifted. I heard ropes tightening outside. A glass fell from the small kitchen counter and shattered. Then another impact hit the hull. Boom! I ran onto the deck. The boat was shaking. The water around me was violently moving, but the rest of the lake was completely calm. I reached for the dock. Before I could step off the boat, I heard something behind me. Water dripping. I turned around. There were wet marks on the deck. Not footprints, handprints. Large pale handprints, one after another, starting at the back of the boat, moving toward me. I jumped onto the dock. The moment my feet touched the wood, the boat stopped moving. Everything became silent. I ran. I didn't take my phone. I didn't take my wallet. I left everything on that boat and ran to my truck. I drove home and called Carl. He met me at the marina after sunrise. We went back to the boat together. Nothing was inside. The deck was dry. The handprints were gone. But the underwater camera was missing. The metal pole I had attached it to was bent underneath the boat. Not broken. Bent. Carl helped me pull it from the water. He stared at it for a long time. Then he asked me if I had knocked back. I didn't answer. He already knew. I sold the boat less than a month later. I never told the man who bought it what happened. Maybe I should have. For almost 3 years, I convinced myself that there was some kind of large animal living near that marina. Then last winter, Carl called me. I hadn't spoken to him in more than a year. He sounded older, tired. He told me the marina had closed for the winter. Almost every boat had been removed from the water, but one boat was still there, an old fishing boat that belonged to the marina. Carl had gone down to check the docks after a storm, at 3:17 in the morning. The security system sent an alert to his phone. One of the cameras had detected movement. Carl checked the live feed from his house. He told me the fishing boat was moving. Something was underneath it. Then he said the camera recorded audio. For several seconds there was only wind. Then the microphone picked up a sound. Knock, knock, knock. Carl watched the boat, and from somewhere inside the empty cabin, something knocked back. 3 times. I asked Carl what happened next. He was silent for a long time. Then he said, "The boat isn't there anymore." I asked him if it sank. Carl said no. The ropes were still tied to the dock. The boat was just gone. I haven't been back to that marina, and I don't sleep on boats anymore. People still tell me it was probably a large fish. Maybe a sturgeon. Maybe floating debris. Maybe the camera made things look different in the dark. I let them believe that. Because there's one detail I've never told anyone. That night, when I knocked against the cabin floor, the 3 knocks that answered me didn't come from underneath the boat. They came from inside the cabin, right behind me. The distress call came from our own boat. I've spent most of my life around water. My father was a fisherman. My grandfather was a fisherman. And by the time I was 12, I knew how to read weather over open water better than most adults I knew. There's one rule my father repeated more than any other. If someone calls for help on the water, you answer. You don't ask if it's convenient. You don't assume someone else will do it. You answer. For 34 years, I believed that rule had probably saved lives. Then one night in October, I answered a distress call, and 3 people disappeared. My name is Nathan. This happened 4 years ago on Lake Superior. There were 4 of us on the boat that night. Me, my younger brother Caleb, my friend Owen, and Owen's cousin Marcus. The boat belonged to me. It was a 30-foot fishing boat with a small enclosed cabin, 2 sleeping bunks, and an old marine radio mounted beside the steering controls. I had owned it for almost 6 years. I knew every sound that boat made. That's important. Because later, People tried to tell me that maybe I had confused the radio transmission with something else. I didn't. I know what I heard. We left the marina shortly after noon. The plan was simple. Fish until sunset, cook something on the boat, then slowly head back. The weather report was clear. The water was calm. For most of the day, nothing unusual happened. At around 7 that evening, we were roughly 14 miles from the marina. The sun had disappeared below the horizon. Caleb was cleaning fishing equipment near the back of the boat. Owen and Marcus were inside the cabin arguing about music. I was at the wheel. That's when the radio came alive, static filled the cabin. Then a woman's voice came through. "Mayday! Mayday!" I immediately turned the volume up. The others stopped talking. The voice returned. It was weak, almost a whisper. "Can anyone hear me?" I grabbed the microphone. "This is fishing vessel North Star. We hear you. State your position." Static. For nearly 10 seconds there was nothing. Then the woman spoke again. "I don't know." Her voice sounded terrified. I looked at Owen. He was already standing beside me. I pressed the microphone. "Do you have GPS coordinates?" The woman didn't answer my question. Instead, she said something strange. "Please don't turn the lights off." I remember looking through the windshield. The lake outside was completely dark. "Ma'am, how many people are on your vessel?" Static. Then, 3. A pause. "No." Her breathing became louder. 4. Another pause. Then she whispered, "I don't know anymore." Nobody in my cabin said anything. Marcus finally laughed nervously. He asked if someone was messing with us. I ignored him. "Ma'am, can you describe your boat?" The answer came immediately. "White yacht. Blue stripe. 2 levels." Then she gave us the name. The Evelyn. Owen searched for the vessel on a marine tracking app. Nothing appeared. That wasn't necessarily strange. Smaller private vessels don't always show up correctly. I asked the woman if she could activate a distress light. For several seconds, there was only static. Then she said, "It's already on." Caleb shouted from the back of the boat, "Light!" I looked to the east. Far across the black water, a red light was flashing. 3 short flashes, a pause, then 3 more. I changed direction. We headed toward it. The closer we got, the worse I felt. I can't explain why. The lake was calm. The weather was clear. But the temperature inside the cabin seemed to drop. Owen noticed it too. He rubbed his arms and asked if I had turned on the air conditioning. I hadn't. About 15 minutes later, we saw the yacht. It matched the woman's description perfectly. White, blue stripe, 2 levels. It was drifting with no navigation lights. Only the red distress light was flashing near the top. I slowed my boat. "Hello?" Owen shouted. No answer. We circled the yacht once. There was no visible damage. It wasn't sinking. There was no smoke, no fire, nothing. The radio suddenly crackled. The woman's voice returned. "Are you here?" I grabbed the microphone. "Yes, we're beside your vessel." There was a pause. Then she whispered, "No, you're not." I felt my stomach tighten. I looked at the yacht. We were less than 30 feet away. "Ma'am, we're looking directly at your boat." Her breathing became fast. Then she said, "That's not our boat." The radio went silent. Marcus immediately said we should leave. Caleb agreed. Owen didn't. He said if someone was injured or trapped inside, we couldn't just abandon them. I hated that he was right. I brought our boat closer. Owen and I boarded the yacht. Caleb and Marcus stayed on my boat. The moment my shoes touched the deck, I noticed the wet footprints. They were everywhere. Bare footprints. Different sizes. Some looked like they belonged to adults. Others were much smaller. They crossed over one another in random directions. But the deck itself was almost dry. There hadn't been rain. I called out, "We heard your distress signal. Is anyone here?" No answer. There was a table near the back of the yacht. 4 plates were sitting on it. Food was still on them. One glass had fallen onto its side. A dark liquid slowly dripped from the edge of the table. Owen touched one of the plates. "It's warm." I didn't like that. We moved toward the cabin. The sliding glass door was open. Inside, every light was on. There was music playing quietly from a speaker, an old jazz song. The cabin looked lived in. A woman's purse was on a couch. 2 pairs of shoes were near the door. A phone was charging on the kitchen counter. I picked it up. The screen lit immediately. No password. There were 17 missed calls, all from the same contact. Home. The most recent call had been 3 minutes earlier. There was no phone signal on my device. I showed Owen. He stared at the screen. Then the phone started ringing. Home. Owen told me not to answer. I answered. Hello? At first there was nothing. Then I heard a man's voice, very far away. Nathan. I stopped breathing. Owen saw my face. What? The voice repeated my name. Nathan, where are you? I ended the call. Owen asked who it was. I told him I didn't know. That was a lie. The voice sounded like my father. My father had been dead for 7 years. I put the phone down. We're leaving. Then we heard someone running upstairs. Fast footsteps crossed the upper deck. Owen looked toward the ceiling. Someone's here. He ran toward the stairs. I grabbed his jacket. Don't! The footsteps stopped, directly above us. Then the marine radio inside the yacht turned on. Static filled the cabin. The woman's voice came through. Please! Owen and I slowly turned toward the radio. Don't go upstairs. A heavy impact hit the ceiling. The lights flickered. Then we heard Caleb screaming from outside. We ran. When I reached the deck, Caleb was standing on my boat. Marcus was gone. Where is he? Caleb pointed toward the water. He jumped. What do you mean he jumped? Caleb was shaking. He heard his mom. I stared at him. Caleb said Marcus had been standing near the railing when he suddenly started talking to someone. Nobody was there. Then Marcus said, Mom? And jumped into the lake. Marcus's mother had died when he was a teenager. I grabbed a flashlight. Owen and I searched the water. Marcus! Nothing. Then we heard him. Help! The voice came from behind the yacht. I moved my boat around. The flashlight beam swept across the water. Marcus! Help me! The voice was farther away now. Caleb pointed. There! Something was in the water. Ahead. Maybe 50 yards away. I pushed the throttle. The boat moved toward it. The figure disappeared underwater. Then Marcus screamed from the opposite direction. Help! I turned. Another head was visible. Caleb whispered, How did he get over there? I didn't answer. Then a third voice called from behind us. Guys! It sounded exactly like Marcus. 3 different locations. 3 identical voices. Owen backed away from the railing. That's not him. The radio on my boat turned on. North Star. The woman's voice. I ran into the cabin. What do you want? Static. Then she answered. We told you not to come. I looked through the windshield at the yacht. Someone was standing on the upper deck. A woman. She was wearing a white nightgown. Her back was facing us. I grabbed the radio. Where are you? The woman on the yacht slowly turned her head. Not her body. Only her head. The radio whispered, Under you. Something hit the bottom of my boat. The impact nearly knocked me down. Caleb screamed. I pushed the throttle forward. We pulled away from the yacht. Owen was shouting at me to stop. He said we couldn't leave Marcus. Then Marcus appeared at the back of the boat. I don't mean in the water. He was standing on the deck, completely soaked. Caleb fell backward. I stared at Marcus. I hadn't seen him climb aboard. None of us had. Owen ran toward him. Marcus raised one hand. Don't! His voice sounded normal. He was breathing heavily. Water poured from his clothes. I asked how he got back onto the boat. Marcus looked at me. Then he smiled. I swam. I looked behind us. The yacht was already hundreds of yards away. There was no possible way. Caleb whispered my name. He was staring at the floor. Wet footprints led from Marcus toward the cabin. But Marcus hadn't moved. I looked back at him. He was still standing near the rear railing. The footprints continued appearing, one by one, across the deck. Something invisible was walking toward us. Owen screamed. We all moved away. The cabin door slowly opened. The footprints went inside. The marine radio turned on. Then we heard Marcus's voice. Help! It came from the radio. The Marcus standing on our deck stopped smiling. His face went completely blank. From the radio, the real Marcus screamed, Please don't leave me! The thing on our boat moved. I don't remember deciding what to do. I grabbed the emergency flare gun from beside the controls. I pointed it at him. Owen shouted at me. The thing wearing Marcus's face tilted its head. Then it spoke, in my father's voice. Nathan, I fired. The flare hit its chest. For 1 second, the entire deck exploded with red light. The thing fell backward into the water, but before it disappeared, I saw its face change. Marcus, the woman from the radio, an old man, a child, my father. Faces moved across its head like reflections on disturbed water. Then it was gone. I pushed the boat as fast as it could go. We didn't stop. We didn't answer the radio. Behind us, the distress call continued. Sometimes it was the woman, sometimes Marcus, sometimes my father. At 2:41 in the morning, we reached the marina. Police were waiting. We reported Marcus missing. A search began before sunrise. They searched for 3 days. They found nothing. Then the Coast Guard told me something that made everything worse. There was no registered yacht named Evelyn in that section of the lake. No distress call had been officially recorded. And according to their tracking data, my boat had been stationary for nearly 4 hours. I argued with them. I showed them our GPS, our route, the location of the yacht. But my GPS history was empty. There was one thing they couldn't explain: the burn mark on the back deck. In Marcus's wet jacket, it was lying inside my cabin. We had all seen Marcus wearing that jacket before he jumped. I sold the North Star the following spring. Caleb stopped going, near deep water. Owen and I haven't spoken in years. I still think about Marcus. I want to believe he died quickly. I want to believe he drowned, because the alternative is worse. 3 months after the incident, I received a phone call. It came at 2:41 in the morning. The number was unknown. I answered. For several seconds I heard water. Then Marcus spoke. "Nathan?" I couldn't move. He was crying. "You left me." I ended the call. The phone rang again, and again, and again. I finally turned it off. The next morning there were 27 missed calls, all from my own phone number. I changed my number. I moved away from the lake, and I haven't stepped onto a boat since. But every October, on the same night it happened, my phone rings at exactly 2:41 a.m. The number is always mine. I never answer anymore. Last year, for the first time, the caller left a voicemail. It was only 6 seconds long. At first there was nothing but water. Then Marcus whispered, "We found your boat." And in the final second of the recording, I heard 3 other voices behind him: Caleb, Owen, and me.